What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about BFA tanking and how to main a tank in general in the next expansion. So for a lot of people, they don't actually even know what tanking is. So a lot of people think that tanking is just the guy who stands in front of the boss, holds aggro, gets hit a whole bunch, and then complains whenever he dies and says, hey, look, healers, heal more, like what's going on? But really, though, tanking is a lot more than that. And most people who've been tanking for several years understand that tanking is a dire responsibility. It's a responsibility to your entire team. It's a responsibility to yourself, responsibility to your off-tank. It is such an important role in the game of World of Warcraft, and it is so overlooked at its importance sometimes that we just forget that there are certain things in that aspect of tanking that you don't know immediately when you start playing the game. Let's say, for instance, you're just now trying to get into tanking. It's a role that you want to fill. Well, the first thing you need to know is that tanking is hard. It's one of the most judgmental roles. It's a role that if you're not good at, you're going to be looked upon very harshly, more so than any other type of position or role. The tanking class undergoes a lot of scrutiny. And the reason why they go under a lot of scrutiny is because there's only 2 people in the tanking position. Whereas in healing and DPS, there are several other people that could be making mistakes. But if you or your off tank make a mistake, you're both probably going to get blamed for it just out of necessity because it's easier to lump you two together. And it's hard. It's really hard, your job, because if you make a mistake, everyone sees it. It's not like in DPS, well, if you stand in something, well, it's okay. As a tank, typically, if you make a mistake that is, like, at all acceptable, remotely acceptable, everyone on your team is going to see that, and they're going to respond in turn. Hopefully, you got a good team, and they're going to let you, learn stuff and not judge you immediately, but it's going to happen. Sometimes you're going to get into groups where they're just going to judge you immediately on how you react to things. And this comes to my first point on tanking. If you're going to be a tank in BFA or any expansion, you need to be knowledgeable. The more knowledgeable you are as a tank, you need to know the healing's job, you need to know the DPS's job, you need to know your own job. And if you don't understand this going in, you need to be ready to be subjected to some scrutiny, because you're going to be expected to play well, because a lot of people don't understand how hard that job is. That job is very difficult. So make sure that the first thing you do before you do any tanking at all is that you do a lot of research. Figure out how you want to tank, what type of tank role you want to be. Do you want to be an off tank? Do you want to be a main tank? Are you a leader? Because in a lot of ways, tanks are leaders. Even if you aren't like literally the raid leader, you're not literally the guild leader, you're not literally the person leading the team, you are the person leading your teammates into battle. So like, you're the person who's there to pull the trash pack or whatever. You're the person who sets the pace of the group typically, and if you don't pull in a certain fashion, your team is going to respond. And this comes to another point where it's like you need to react actively during the progression of a run, like a 5-man or a raid. Even in a raid, even some people will say, whatever, just pull when your team is there. But even in a raid, the same thing can be said here. If you're in any kind of environment where your team has to go through content at a certain pace, you need to make sure that you are regulating yourself in such a way that you're responding to your team. So if you pull some mobs and your team kills it super quick, it's probably a good idea for you to pull more than what you pulled last time to see what they can handle. And what I like to call for this first bit here is this fishing response. And what I mean by fishing response is that your first few pulls in a raid or a 5-man is judging what your DPS can do. If your DPS can push really hard on these mobs and kill them really quickly, you might as well pull more, because it's going to help your team feel like they're doing something, for one. And secondly, you're going to get through the content faster, and it's going to feel like a fun run. If everyone's getting to do their rotations and actually put out some numbers and do some things, you should need to pull groups of mobs effectively in such a way that your team can respond and act upon it. If you pull too slow and you see your teammates pulling mobs ahead of you, don't get mad at them. Okay, if they're pulling mobs, it means that you've done something wrong. It means that you have not proactively worked out how fast and how strong your team is. Typically, sometimes people will be stupid and just pull mobs because they think they're fun and they're the king of the world, but most of the time it's really, really good players who are really, really geared, doing a lot of damage, and then for some reason having 10 seconds of not doing anything because the main tank, the tank who's pulling whatever they're doing, isn't keeping up with the DPS demand. And that's not anyone's fault. It's just something that you need to work through as a tank to make sure that your job is more efficient in that way. And this might be less of an issue for a group that it's a normal, or a group that's just doing low mythic keys. Maybe your group is good, just having a good time and like casually going through, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. If your group is all set with just chilling and going at your own pace, then you should do that. But I'm talking about from a pug's perspective. If you're pugging at all, and if you're in any kind of mythic raiding guild, or if you're in a like high keystone group that does like high keys, you need to make sure that you are consistently trying to push that speed, because your group's DPS is typically going to be higher. So make sure that that is something that you focus on whenever you're trying to main next expansion. There's also, the most important thing about tanking, for me personally, is the niches between each tanks. Each tank has their own special little uniqueness. Their own special little thing that makes them better or more appealing than the other. So, in a lot of ways, Paladins are like one of the most unique, fun tanks for me, because I can easily hop into that role and mitigate and like make other abilities disappear that would never, like, would be issues for other tanks. Like, I could get a debuff that is almost like stupidly hard to get rid of, and I could bubble it off and taunt the boss, and I'm fine, I'm tanking, everything's good, and I can still hold the boss for like, you know, a good 2 more minutes. While if I was another tank, I might need to taunt swap more often. And it really was apparent this expansion with the Maiden of Vigilance. I think that's what her name was, and that was a boss in TOS, and you had to taunt off and hit your raid with this big AoE and share it with the group, basically, to make sure that this ability didn't one-shot you as a tank. So what you would do as a paladin is I would just turn it away from the team and take it solo, because I had Ardent Defender and I had Bubble, and my Bubble and my Ardent Defender would counteract pretty much every single one of them that I got. And that's something that a lot of tanks didn't take advantage of, that I noticed. A lot of tanks could have taken advantage of that, kept the group up as a whole more, and would have used their abilities that they probably didn't use the entire fight. Same thing with Death Knights. Death Knights are awesome, and they're probably one of the most wanted classes in the game for tanking, because their mass grips are probably one of the most intriguing, awesome things in the game. Being able to create a death ball instantly is amazing, and it's something that every tank wants to do and tries to do when you're in a 5-man dungeon, or if you're in doing trash for a boss, or before a boss, you actively interrupt casters and pull things to casters that you haven't interrupted yet, to try to make a tight death ball, a ball in which your group can AoE and do damage to, and you can't do that as effectively as a Death Knight can. A Death Knight can grip singly a caster, can mass grip a ton of mobs into one little circle. I mean, you can't do that as any other tank, and that is one of the most appealing things about Death Knights. And these things you have to think about when you're going in and you're talking about tanking, and you're talking about maining a tank in BFA. That's a really big focus, is just understanding that niche of your class and really focusing on it and really doing your best to, I guess, do that role, that niche, provide that skill that you should have, that skill being that skill ceiling that you break, like bubbling and taunting and popping Ardent Defender at appropriate times, understanding whenever your boss is going to hit you and being able to react with a mitigation cooldown. These things are really important that a lot of tanks struggle with, even in Mythic. Even in-game Mythic tanks, I've seen not do this as well as they really should be. Probably the most important thing when it comes to tanking, above all the other things here, is the positioning, which we talked about death balls a bit, but positioning is really key. If you position things quickly, like bosses, like if you pull them and move them to the location quickly and don't just take your time, because you need to get boss from point A to point B quickly so that your melee can actually do stuff. You don't have to worry about standing in something if something happens. You need to make sure that your boss's back is positioned in a place where there is no AoE damage going out so your DPS can get behind it. You need to make sure that the boss isn't facing the raid so that you can accurately just take the hits and not have to worry about Tom, Dick, or Harry behind you getting hit. You need to make sure that when you pick up a bunch of mobs that you're interrupting the mobs in range and you're pulling mobs to the mobs in range to make sure that they're all getting clustered up and ready to kill. And that's probably one of the things that I judge tanks on the most whenever I used to be a raid leader. The things I used to judge on tanks is like, man, are you doing this? Are you pulling things together? Are you grouping them up? Are you a good tank? And I know that sounds really judgmental, but that's really like, that's the golden rule. That's like the golden standard. You want tanks who are able to do that, who are able to understand and actively make an environment so that your group can succeed. If they're not actively creating that environment, you probably need another tank if you're doing high mythic stuff, but you probably need to learn this skill. And if you don't learn this skill, you're putting your entire group at pain's length. You're hurting your team. Besides all this is pretty much just something you should do in every expansion, but really though, the biggest problem that's going to be occurring in BFA is going to be the GCD cooldown changes. And what I mean by that is, if you're a current tank right now and you're worried about GCD changes, you should be worried about GCD changes because it feels awkward. It feels awkward. I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, it's probably bad for more different tanks. It's not going to be the same streamline throughout all the tanks, and in the back, you've been watching a video of me playing a Paladin tank for probably the last 10 minutes or so, and if you're really focused on the GCD changes, you need to make sure you understand what changes are affecting your cooldowns and your cooldown rotations for your main tank class. For me, it took a while for me to understand that a lot of my abilities are on the GCD, so I have to stop attacking. I have to actively stop hitting my buttons like my Avenger Shield and my Shield of the Righteous just so that I can hit a mitigation talent or just so I can hit Avenging Wrath to make sure that I can do the things that I have to do. And it's a little awkward, and if you're not used to that, then you need to get used to it quickly because that's going to be the biggest challenge for tanks come next expansion. All in all, guys, hey, this video is done, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I really do think that, this is important. I hope you guys liked what I put out. If you did like it, please leave a like, leave a comment down below. I respond to every comment that I see, without a doubt, and hopefully I can get you some more content out there next time, next week, next video, hopefully this week. I'm sorry about the last video. It wasn't the most well-received video I've had. I've never had a video disliked and liked equally, and it's kind of like thrown me off a little bit, but hopefully this video does better. Hopefully you guys like it. If you don't like it, let me know why in the comments below, and I'll do my best to fix it. Other than that, guys, my Twitter and my Twitch are linked in the end card, which is going to come up here pretty soon. I hope you guys like it. Good song, by the way, in the end card. I'm going to leave a link to it down below, too, so hopefully you guys like that, and I will see you guys soon. Have a great day. Peace.
You're no hero, so don't act like it. And please don't treat me like I'm your sidekick. Cause I watch TV, I see how life is. And it's not easy, but still I'm right here. Screaming I'm good, I'm good. Yeah, my nigga, I'm good, yeah.
Coming up to me like you still making music, man. Ask them kind of questions, shouldn't even shake your hand. Thought you were the homie, still don't know me.